Hello, hello. Very much looking forward to this time together with Andrew and Rick. It's been a while, and also for a couple other reasons we'll get into. While people are trickling in, we have our classic icebreaker question. So, Andrew, Rick, if there's a piece of technology that you could uninvent, what would it be?
Rick, you go first.
Oof. Um, Probably the phone, mostly because I'm addicted to it and distracting me all the time. And I've not found a way to get unaddicted to it. So I would like to go back to the situation where my parents were like 30 years ago, that they could just go out without a phone and they couldn't be like, hey, what are you doing? You said that you will come home at 2 a.m. and it's already 5 a.m. What are you doing? And so with the phone, I have no excuses. So I would pick the phone.
Other than the obvious ways we all kill each other in horrible ways, I will go with the more tame toys that make noise. Just noise and unexpected interruptive noises in general. I have all my phone notifications off, all of it. Like just anything that wants to steal my attention from me is something I want uninvented.
Cool. Love those. I also had the phone, by the way. So, Rick, we're aligned here. Um, Cool. People are joining. Let's get started here. So one of the things coming into this webinar, and I know this is also on Rick's mind, is we have a difficult spot to land on in the spectrum, right? Have you ever been in a session where it was like way too high level, way too buzzy, and you said like, this is really not valuable, or the other side of the spectrum where it was everything was going over your head because it was too technical. So we need to land on the sweet spot here, right? Not too buzzy. I mean, literally everybody and their nephew is talking about AI, so we want to make this practical in good CareOps spirit and make sure people can take something away from this call. So that's the objective, and so I'm asking the audience to keep us honest here. If you have comments, if you think we're veering too much into the philosophical or too much into the technical, raise your hand. Give us a shout in the Q&A or in the chat, and then that allows us to stay on topic. Let's start with a quick 20-second personal intros for those who don't know all three of us. So Andrew, if you would like to go first.
Thank you, Thomas. Andrew Schutzbank, primary care physician by training, currently CEO and founder of Schutzworks, which is an advisory company, and I write at the Schutz blog. And today we're going to be talking about the Schutz Duck, which is the AI incarnation of all my advice that I've built using vibe coding. Started my career after residency creating ex-Iora Health. I was there for about 10 years, then went on to Cricket Health, led product both of those. Spent a year doing operating partner work at Scan's portfolio of startup companies, and I've been independent ever since. So glad to be here. Thank you.
Great. Rick?
Damn, you practiced that intro. That was very smooth. So my background is in nursing, based in Belgium, but spent 99% of my time focusing on US healthcare. So I have the luxury to try to fix that broken system, but I don't need to experience it because I have free healthcare, which is something that I can brag about. And I work at Sort Health or Sort Intelligence specifically, leading product and strategy, which means doing a bunch of things and more focused on helping providers actually spend attention on the patient versus being on their computer all the time or on their phone.
Thanks. Thomas, co-founder of AWell Health, also co-author of CareOps. Let's get going here. Andrew, for the audience, given we'll talk about vibe coding and how that has changed product development, let's start at the very beginning. So I'd love to understand what is the conceptual model you have of product development? Let's start there as a good foundation.
Sure. So the nice part is I've been writing about it for a long time, so it's pretty well organized. I think I have it down to like two main constructs. The first one is the best products, the best services, which is really what I do. It just they're called products because that's what technology is, but I'm really more on the service side. Started from my experience as a practicing primary care clinician. So step one, if the user or customer achieves what they wanted, right? So in the case of a patient, it's like they're better, they're symptom got reduced or their functionality returned, or at least they are reassured, or in software they accomplished whatever they were trying to do, then the product is successful. And so the key of all things is they're trying to solve a problem for somebody else. And I've always found the actual solutions, while they're fun and interesting and cool, are actually irrelevant and secondary. So that's kind of concept one. And then concept two is you can't predict the future, so just stop trying. It never works the way you think it will. It always takes longer than you think. Sometimes it takes less than you think. And so the first corollary of you can't predict the future is then don't do too many things at once, because then you will be unable to recognize your present. And if I can get everyone to just believe they can't predict the future anymore, and my favorite example for that as a product leader in 2019 and 2020, because I always hated roadmaps as like a promise list of sequential features, was I asked everyone in 2020 how many people had COVID on their roadmap in 2019. And the answer is no one. And it was the most important thing that happened pretty much in our lives at that time. So it's an extreme example, but there are millions of examples like that every single day. So I'll just encourage you to just stop trying and stop being upset with yourself when you can't, and take things as they come and do as little as possible at once, focus, and you actually get things done for people. That's the essence of my product philosophy, and it kind of all stems from there.
Cool. Rick, how does that align with your philosophy?
I think pretty well. Right now, given that we are still an early organization, or at least a division that I work at, the philosophy that I have is sort of like being the bridge between messy healthcare and engineering people, or engineers in general, that think that problems are straightforward and everything is fixable. But you need to understand sort of like the nuances of US healthcare, or healthcare in general. So I would like to frame or position myself more as like the guy saying where we need to go and guiding them through all the mess, and showing like, here is a problem that we need to solve, here is a problem that we need to solve. What I don't do at this point, which I think PMs do probably a bit too often, is spoon feeding the solutions. So I'm very much focused from a product perspective on like, here are the problems, go find a solution. And then when they come with a solution, then obviously I will again try to guide them into better directions if it makes no sense, but not very solution oriented, and very, very much focused on the problem itself.
Cool. Andrew, I'd love to get some examples of those things that took less time than expected, because I haven't encountered them, especially not in healthcare.
Sometimes I can get to the airport really fast. Sometimes there's not traffic, right? My favorite version of it is we were going to the airport. We left like 6 a.m. It's about a 15-minute drive under optimal circumstances. Got to the airport, dropped everybody off on the curb to go park the car, realized I left my backpack at home. And I was able to make it back home and back to the airport without much stress. So sometimes, even when you mess things up, and the corollary, I guess, is I have the strange ability that I'm really good at catching stuff, but only when I drop it. It's like a strange Spider-Man ability that like follows clumsiness. So yeah, some things just take less time than you think, but usually not.
Cool. Okay, now that we have kind of the foundational, philosophy in your head, Crisp, I think you have a very interesting background, because it's both, it's three things. It's MD, it's classic product roles at different organizations, and now it's this vibe coding, right? Walk us through this journey, right? And how did you like concretely get to vibe coding?
Sure. So when I was a medical resident, so 2008 through 2011 or so, I started writing a lot because I was angry all the time and I needed an outlet for it. And it seemed like other people were angry in the same way. And so I wrote for the Society of General Internal Medicine forum, which is this little like extra insert magazine that was designed to be controversial. And from there, I started creating the Schutz blog. Still writing there today. 2022, 23, I really kicked it back off. The reason why I mentioned that is I got a call from one of my mentors about an article that I just written. And he's like, this is one of your best. And while I appreciated that, it occurred to me that the reason why it was the best is it happened to be what he needed at the moment. And so I've always struggled with the fact that my writing is kind of hard to read because it's dense. Someone asked me for the TLDR, and my response to them is that, like, the 1,800 words I gave you is the TLDR. Like, I can't make it better than that. So and articles are long and reading is hard. And so I tried audio. I record all my episodes. You can listen to them at Spotify at Schutz Talks. But what occurred to me was, wouldn't it be cool? This is, I guess, about a year and a half ago. Wouldn't it be, not about a year ago, wouldn't it be cool if there was a chatbot that sat on the Schutz blog that you could talk to and it'd tell you what to read? Right. And like that was step one. And as soon as I put it up, by the way, I figured out how to get a chatbot on Substack, which I don't know that anyone else has. So I'm happy to share that secret because people have been trying to hack that and I got it to work because of vibe coding. We'll get back to that in a second. People started chatting with it, and immediately the people that knew me at least started trying to pump it for advice like they pumped me for advice. But it wouldn't do it, right? It was like designed to just give you articles to read or send you to me. It's supposed to be for like lead generation for Schutzworks. So then over the summer, I thought about it more, and I was like, maybe I should just release a full advice version of me, right? I was like a little scared. What if it tells people to do dangerous things? So I spoke to some friends from ex-Iora and some new friends that are I've met since, and they basically were like, just try it. I had already started using Chatbase to build the first bot. Duncan Reese gets credit for connecting me to Ben's Bytes, the newsletter. Ben's Bytes has a library. The library sent me to Chatbase. That's that story. It was super easy. It took me about 15 minutes to get it to work, at least in prototype. And that's the story you'll hear repeatedly. Like the prototypes take 15 minutes. Production software takes forever. So over the summer, I worked on releasing the full bot. I had the name for it for years, which was called Schutz Duck. The reason is there's a concept I learned about called rubber duck debugging, where if you have a problem, you talk to a rubber duck and it gives you the answer. And so a good friend of mine at ex-Iora, when I was leaving, she was very upset. She's like, what am I supposed to do? So I told her about rubber duck debugging. And within a day, she sent me back a picture of a gigantic rubber duck where she had cut out a full-size headshot of me and put my face on the duck. And she's like, I will talk to this whenever I'm in trouble. And so that's always stuck in my mind. It's like, all right, that's going to be the name of the advice bot because it's so perfect. So then decided to just do it and let it loose. And again, it took about 20 minutes to create the actual chatbot itself, train it on all my writing, on kind of public content and some private chat content that I have as well. So it sounds like me. Sent it out to some friends, and the advice I got was like, this is great. This advice is amazing. This is like $1 million advice. You should be finding a way to capture the value of this somehow. So that's when I was like, okay, can I rebuild this bot out of Chatbase myself? Do I need to? Haven't done that yet. And B, how do I build a website around it to actually like monetize it? Because Chatbase wouldn't let me. And so ironically, the like new technology, game-changing AI thing is turning myself into a chatbot. That was the easy part. What I've been struggling with for the last 2 months is like getting this website to work, just a regular website. Like you log in, it gives you messages, you pay me money, and you leave. That's been the hard part. So I didn't start with that though. The first vibe coding thing I did, again, I was nudged by a woman I'm working with who is a graduate student at MIT. She's like, you can do this. I promise you, you can do it. Just do it. She's like, get Cursor, get Claude, just figure it out. The first task was to actually sync my calendar, my Google work calendar with my personal Google calendar with a client's calendar, which is also in Google, so that I didn't have to look at their calendar because I don't want to have to check it. They could see my availability, but not what I was doing. They could book meetings and see when I was available, because that's a really nice dialogue that Google has where you can see who can come to a meeting, right, who's available. I wanted them to be able to do that. So they can work entirely in their calendar. I can work entirely in mine, and the events are synced across back and forth. And I couldn't pull it off with settings. So I was like, all right, this feels like a good first vibe coding project because no one cares if it breaks. It's not a big deal. Let me try it out. And so again, I had a prototype that seemed to work in about an hour and a half. Claude helped me do it through Google Apps Script, which I didn't know existed. Now I know about Google Apps Scripting. I have like 15 of them that do various things. You'll see this if you start, you can't stop. Just yesterday, I finally got an email from my own script that downloads weather information to tell me that it was time to put on my winter tires because the temperature's now been below 45 degrees. Like I'm automating everything I can in my life. I've joined a group in Cambridge called Nerdy Parents who are using AI to automate parenting. And like, of course, Cambridge, Massachusetts is filled with these people, and it's been a lot of fun. So getting back to calendar sync, it sort of works now. I've gone through a couple revisions. I still think it's
do I
perfect.
hear between the lines that you've solved scheduling in healthcare as a side project?
Just like on the fly, you know? So funny thing about scheduling in healthcare, no one knows what's in the schedule, like what an appointment is. So they're impossible to schedule. It's like if I asked you to make one of those cool arrangements they make out of like soda cans where they like put a sports team out of soda can boxes. But I didn't tell you what I wanted you to build, but I said just build it. Also, all the boxes are random size and you can't know until you put them out what size they are. So scheduling is broken because we don't understand the work. That's my whole theory of healthcare is we just don't understand the work. And we're not even trying. We're trying to work around it. So those who are trying to understand the work will actually figure it out. So project 1, calendar sync. Project 2 was, I think, the tire thing. And then that's when I started vibe coding the website for Schutzbank. I learned a bunch of things along the way, which are super helpful. Number one is right when you're your most critical part of doing this project, you don't really understand, and you're like barely loosely hanging on to, your chatbot will run out of context and you'll have to start over, like every time without fail. So maybe we'll come back to some of the resources at the end of like how to think about it. So I learned how to create projects. I learned how to upload artifacts and like get better at prompt and really context engineering, figuring out how to tell it just enough, but not too much so that it didn't get confused and lost. So that's what I've been doing. And I've just kind of been doing it more and more. More of my days get sent to vibe coding as I try and get this thing done. It has really been a thrilling process. And I would say for those of you that play video games, it's a lot like the flow you get from gaming. The best example is Factorio, if any of you in the world have played it, also known as Cracktorio, because you can't stop. Very similar. You see a problem, you find a problem, you fix a problem. Nope, you didn't fix it. You got to tweak it. Okay, you did fix it. So it's been really cool. Let me pause there because I know there's a lot of different directions we can go in.
Yeah, I'd like to tie it back to your earlier experience as a product manager and a product leader. So I think many people in the audience probably have done some vibe coding, but the question is kind of, when you vibe code and when do you give it to an engineer, right? When do you hire the engineering
Sure.
department here? Yeah.
So I'm wrestling with that right now. So answer 1 is when you have enough revenue to justify it. So that's in the case of a new entrant, like I'm not going to hire someone to do this yet because I'm trying to bootstrap it. So I actually had one of my, having worked very closely with the ex-Iora engineering team, friends with a lot of those folks. And so one of them has been, in the background at my availability the whole time. And he, again, everyone sort of encouraged me the same thing, which is based on my product background and having worked with me, they're like, you probably know enough of good practices in software and what you're doing that you're dangerous. They're like, you're not an engineer, so you shouldn't not be vibe coding, and you're not a total novice. You know some stuff, and so you can interact with it and push back on it. He gave me some tips. He sent me the Cloud engineering guide. He's like, call me if you need me, and I'll let you know when I go from friend Mike to contractor Mike. So step 1 is like for new entrants revenue. But my perspective still is I'm trying to come up with an MVP that I can validate that there's some demand for. And what I found vibe coding be so helpful with is I can go from idea to prototype. And I think that's the changeover point, right? Once you have a validated prototype that this thing kind of works, that's when I think you call the adults and you call the engineers. Same thing with a company, right? Like once you have some version of product market fit, you start hiring adults who know what they're actually doing. But the power of the tools is that I can take the blurry image in my head, which is it's so clear to me, right? But when I go to draw it or write it out, it's total garbage. And I can use the vibe coding tools to feed me back my own ideas so I can give feedback on what it thinks I'm saying. And so it's very similar to being a product leader, where I'm not making this stuff. I'm just looking what other people have made and said like closer, closer, further, further, closer, closer. And so it's cool because it's like I'm bootstrapping a prototype feedback loop. But I think the fundamental answer is like, once you're building webhooks for alarms and alerts to go off in the middle of the night, like get other people to run this thing. And that's kind of where I am right now. It's like it works kind of. There are problems. Your feature set is less user-facing and more infrastructural, or it's just too long and you don't have enough time to build it, start hiring people. But I think you should have a working prototype, which is a power you couldn't have had 3 years ago.
And so you mentioned that you work at a big organization. Do you think that anything vibe code related could hit production as well? Or like how would you define validation of the prototype?
Yeah, so I'm independent, so I'm my own validation. So what I'm looking for is, are people using it, and then are they coming back and are they signing up, right? So I think if every product or service is meant to solve a problem for someone else, then the solving of that problem is your measure of success. So it's a little bit different for everybody. Revenue is sort of an interesting one because it's like solves it enough that they're willing to pay. not every situation you're going to have, especially for internal software, which is a lot of what I built prior to this. There's not really revenue implications in the same way. And so, but having a measure of success, no matter how poorly defined, is important so you can get a sense that people actually want it and are using it. It's some version of usage, revenue, spontaneous text messages about how great it is. What I've learned too is you've gone too far. Like once you start getting like, this is great, oh my God, you're validated, because that always decays into I've only found there's only two types of product feedback. This sucks, or when's the next thing coming? And when's the next thing coming is the good one. That's like, you've nailed it. So people are done with what you've already built and they want the next one. That means you've gotten it right. If you've gotten that far, you're probably too late. Like that is sort of on the cusp of validation though. When people are not interested by what you built and they want you to build the next thing, that's solid validation.
If you transport back in time to your work as a product leader, and all of a sudden you have 100 docs throwing their vibe coded prototypes at you, how do you organize the work? How do you get that done?
So I think organizing what to work on is the secret challenge of product leaders that isn't talked about enough. We spend too much time talking about the work or like solving problems and not which problems. Because it's worse. It's less fun work objectively to tell people they can't work on things that make their lives worse. So I know why people don't do it, because it sucks. But if you don't do it, things fall apart. So a lot of that, I think, fundamentally stems from what vibe coding changes is the way that individual users, especially in an enterprise situation like docs using their own software, can make their visions real and can contribute to prototyping and solution creation. But at the chain of what to work on, it's all the way at the end, right? So it still starts with like, what are the company goals, which leads to focus and prioritization, which leads to what we're actually committing resources to improving. So what results are we not hitting that we want to hit? What methods are we going to try? What solutions are we going to try to hit those results? And then what are the prototypes and kind of approaches for those solutions? So it's all at the end of my hierarchy of work. You just get way better data entrance into the kind of bet process or solutioning process once you've already put a box around what people should be working on. There always needs to be like a hackathon, 20% time, cool thing one doc came up with, or one person came up with, pathway. But if you're always looking at cool things that get made, and the reason why you always need that pathway is that's where you get serendipity in your favor and something will radically change what you're doing. But that's still pretty rare, and the hit rate is low, the tail is long. You still want most people focused on, you want most of your product attention focused on hitting results / solving problems you've agreed to solve first. And so I just see vibe coding not as a unmanaged, you will flood the gates with potential solutions that shouldn't be worked on. Managed, it lets end users participate so much more deeply in the process of creation than they could before by just kind of describing their work or like using the limited language they had around web interfaces or whatever.
Yeah, the way I think a bit about this is that the bottleneck is kind of moving from the engineering resources to the upstream and downstream position of indeed what to work on, because they're all of a sudden all of these ideas can move from just language to something that is clickable, which is much easier to understand. Oh, this is what you actually want to build, or the problem you want to solve. And then downstream, it's obviously how do we merge all of this stuff or actually get it into production code and consistent with the rest of the product, right? So it's kind of, it feels like we're moving from one bottleneck to two bottlenecks that are upstream and downstream in the process.
That's right. I mean, so it's funny you mentioned that. So kind of rounding out the rest of my product philosophy, you can't predict the future. Don't work on too many things at once. Therefore, you have to prioritize what you work on. And what you prioritize is the constraints in your system, wherever the work is piling up, right? And so engineering is classically a place where work gets constrained in organizations. In clinical organizations, doctors are generally it's the way work is designed in licensing requirements. You see docs have piles of work and everyone else waiting for them. The rule is the same though. If what we've done now is move the constraint, you still have to focus wherever the constraint is. And so I agree with you. It's like you will always, it's out of the frying pan into the fire. So you will always, the success is the journey of solving smaller problems and then realizing much, much larger, more threatening problems forever. And so, so you start with like, how do I get to my meeting today? You end with like, aliens are coming to destroy Earth. What do we do? And that is success. It's just this ever beginning problem set of misery that we get to tackle, and that's the fun part.
Yeah, so Rick, how did that sort? Are engineers vibe coding as well?
Yes, and actually had a question for Andrew because there is a problem that I'm currently facing. So we worked on a project that was focused on revenue cycle on our side. And so we had multiple meetings where we discussed sort of like these are the problems. Then we vibe coded something where we like almost one-shotted what was needed. Like this is amazing. This is exactly what I was describing. How did you manage to build that? But then now we were struggling with setting the expectation because vibe coding is so quick. So you get to a prototype pretty quickly, but then once you want to put it into production, of course, things break and it takes like not a few hours, but it takes a few days or a few weeks. And so that's something that we are struggling with right now, and I don't have an answer to yet. It's sort of like we're becoming too successful in our vibe coding exercises. So we nail the prototypes, but the roadmap cannot follow because it's sort of like, when is this coming and when is that coming? And you already showed me the prototype. But so to answer your question, Thomas, yes, we are using vibe coding and it's working very effectively to build the right things quicker, to Andrew's point, because like if we didn't have vibe coding, we would have been building wrong directions and it would take like a few weeks before we get feedback of like this was actually wrong. Well, now we can get to a prototype in an hour, but now we're struggling with like the sequencing of what comes after the prototype has been validated. And I don't have an answer to that just yet.
So I first encountered this problem in the pre-vibe coding era because we had hack fests. So ex-Iora, every year, the engineering team would go away to someplace in New England off season, and we would just sit around and engineers and everyone, engineers, designers, everyone was invited to come, docs, whatever, just worked on whatever they wanted for 2 or 3 days, collaboratively, independently, kind of their style. And it was just like, just build cool stuff. Let's see what happens. We'll all have fun together. It's okay to spend 3 days to just hang out and see what comes out of it. And so we would always have a Hackfest contest of basically we would demo all the prototypes. There were prototypes and designs that were made out of Hackfest to the executive team. And Rashika would see stuff and be like, I want that. Like, let's go. And it's the same problem where it didn't work yet, right? It was the right concept. It was the same exact pattern. It just sort of got there a different way. And we had a similar problem where our sprint reviews, we were previewing upcoming software that wasn't in production yet and creating the perception that we were like dragging our feet. And so what we did was we stopped having the Hackfest contests and we stopped demoing prototypes for sprint review. The rule with sprint review is to showcase and demonstrate software that just went into production. So prototyping was used in the design and development process. Like you show users things that like react to this. And they're like, oh, that's really cool. I want that. But they were used to it because they were used to designs, right? Like Matt, our designer, would make designs that he would design in code. It looked like it was software. It's not software, right? But people kind of got used to that pattern of like, okay, this is something I might have in the future. And so the mistake we made, that you're making, that we're all making, is you're so excited by the magic of vibe coding, the same way we're so excited by the magic of what our engineers could make. Shout out to Elliot, who always seemed to win the Hackfest competitions. That you're showing people too soon, and that's the sin. So just don't demo it as software. Bring it to users for like however you bring designs and prototyping, and then you won't get in trouble in the same way.
So it's like adding a disclaimer before showing and also not showing it too soon.
Yeah, just
The
don't like
problem there that I
no big
have
bang
is,
demos.
so like whenever you had prototypes, like let's say 5 years ago was a Figma prototype, so it was like pretty obvious that it was a prototype. But now it's sort of like it's working and it's actually working pretty well. And it's like, this is not a prototype, it's actually working. Like you're doing all the things and you're clicking on all the things. So that's the realism is becoming too real. So maybe we need to step back a little bit on the realism.
So
Yeah, so in that case,
it's
show it
actually
earlier.
it's a question from the audience that ties into this. So would you as an organization want to constrain yourself to just a clickable prototype versus a fully working prototype? Because a fully working prototype gives the impression that it actually works and it's done, right? Whether
Sure.
with a clickable prototype, that confusion is less likely.
So this is tricky, right? Because the reason you'd formally do a a Figma design prototype over a fully clickable working one was that the delta in creating the two of them was pretty large, right? You can make a Figma prototype in a work session or two, a day or two, or really a few days, whereas a fully working prototype might take weeks, so you don't want to waste the time. Now the delta is really small, right? Like you can get a workable prototype in a day or so. So what I would say is, the more, as long as your cycles are still about a day or two, right? So you're still just not spending that much time getting that far away from the last time you checked in with the user for feedback. The clickable prototype is better. What you might need to do, I don't know if they do this everywhere else, but we still have natural gas in large quantities in America. And so they actually add a chemical to make natural gas smell horrible, so that if you have a leak, you can smell it. Other places have just moved on to electrification. We've not. So you have to add the gas smell to the prototype, right? Like, so like
that.
click on a
Love
thing
that.
and have a
Yeah,
crash,
yeah, yeah.
right? Like have it, this is not like, this is a simulation. This is not real. And the clickable one's better because you can get more behavior out of the user. You see what they would do and have it work, but you just have to reinforce like, you know, this is a mirage.
It's the classic big red banner on top of the screen. This is a prototype, but then people don't see that anymore after using it 3 times, right? Then
Right.
they
So
develop
that's what I'm saying. That's
for
what has to
exactly the
break.
banner.
It has to smell bad. The banner doesn't smell bad enough.
Yeah. I want to move on to the next topic, which I think is one that goes to the heart of this conversation. What's the clinician builder unfair advantage? What is
Yes.
the stuff that you guys as docs can build that a product manager or a tech bro or an engineer cannot build?
Yes. So um, it's fundamentally it's the lived experience of the absolute chaos of healthcare. And I don't mean the chaos part, which is like no one does their job well and we fax things, we don't have information. What I'm talking about is you see a patient, and we've all had experiences where we see a patient, we come to a diagnostic and therapeutic plan, they're happy with it, they get better, it's working, and then a few days later, it's not, or weeks later, it's not, right? Like suddenly medicine side effects crop up, some other change in their life causes a problem. And so you're just used to knowing that the other shoe is always going to drop. And just because it worked for a little while doesn't mean it's going to work over time. And you've never really solved any problem. And like that inherent anxiety is clinical experience. And so you just get used to a non-deterministic universe, whereas I think a lot of other professions that are industrialized, and it may just be as simple as that everything except for education and healthcare has a fairly clear outcome, right? Like when I get on a plane, I want to get to my destination alive and within the specified time. Cool. So I can measure against that and make progress. Healthcare is like, I want to get better, healthier, faster, less sick. Like, I have an article about 4 types of patient problems that I wrote. But still, it's way murkier and individualized. So clinicians, whether they know it or not, are very comfortable with that chaos. I call that the primary chaos of care. And so as a result, a lot of time is often wasted between docs and engineers explaining how medicine works. Engineers like scoffing that like that couldn't possibly be because it's so ridiculous and silly. And then docs eventually getting like written off, right? Or describing everything they do as an edge case because it doesn't cover 80% of the time. Like, you know what? Most of our work is unfortunately edge cases, right? There are patterns there, but they're not obvious. And so I think as a doc creator, as a clinician creator of all kinds, you have a chance to build and model your understanding of cause and effect, which is usually the inverse of everybody else's that's kind of looking at it in healthcare. And so maybe that's a little vague. Put simply, like you can make it work the way you want, and you can make it work for you faster. And then you can use that as an example of what you want and give it to an engineer who can try to abstract more general patterns. Instead of like the classic move this button, right? Or I want fewer clicks. Like there's a lot of things docs say, but now it's like, but if the clicks are valuable, then that's fine, right? Or I don't actually want a button at all. I want a totally different pattern. And so in the past, there are very few doc engineers. If there are, they're not really given access to the code base, or they're so different the way they practice are not useful. At Iora, we had a software called Text Expander, which is really valuable because there's a very light scripting language you could put on top of our software, and like managing it was a nightmare. But it worked. And so like the more savvy docs would use Text Expander to start building prototypes. But it just, clinicians can build things that are immediately useful for themselves, for patients, because they're trying to do the work. In the same way that engineers are pretty good at building infra tools, right? Because they know the work, and so they know it would make their work easier. And one of my hypotheses is that left to our own devices, we will all try to make our work easier for ourselves. And so that's why it's the job of the product function and company leadership to remind everyone that the purpose of your job is to solve a problem for somebody else, not to make it easier for you. And that balance is really important.
And I actually think the one of the realizations that I also had over the past couple of years is sort of like the edge cases in healthcare in general are the product. Like, for example, we have an engineering exercise where the people joining, they need to build an appointment confirmation agent. And so they can interview me and they can ask me questions on like, okay, I'm the client and they can ask me questions, what does the appointment confirmation agent needs to do? And then I go in and typically they ask like only a handful of questions and then they go out and build. And then they present it to me and then I'm like, yeah, but it's not for this edge case and that edge case, so you need to go back. So then they go back. Then they present it again and it's like, oh, you also forgot this edge case. And this is just to teach them that one, they obviously need to ask better questions, but then two, that even something as simple as like the appointment confirmation agent has like so many edge cases that are very difficult to like exclude from a product, because once you do that, then the value is like kind of useless. So I think that's a big advantage for like people that have that physician background, nursing background, or just healthcare background. Is sort of like you can get to the solution and all the edge cases much quicker because you understand all of the nuances of all of these things.
Exactly right. We have so much tacit knowledge. We know things we don't know that we know. And they define our behavior and our belief systems and our anxieties and contingencies. And what's cool is prior to LLM work, a lot of healthcare software that we built was explicit, right? It was like, in this case, it was all rules-based, right? In this case, do this, in this case, do that. And it collapses immediately. Even if you could come up with rules for everything, just maintaining it is nearly impossible. And now you can start building implicitly, where like the LLMs just seem to know what I'm going for. I don't know. It's really cool. They like their intuition and my intuition, it works out well. And so the tacit knowledge gets reflected. Rick, to your example about edge cases, I've been asked probably 1,000 times in my career, like how's the first visit going to go? And it's like, well, the first branch point is if the person's crying or not, right? Like, right? Like, are they crying? Because that's one direction and they're not. Okay, if they're not crying, are they cognitively intact? Do we speak the same language? Do I have any medical, like, there's like a million path variations that are actually really easy to manage in the moment. And they're just really hard to plan for in a rules-based environment. So that's why the new technology is so exciting. So I think docs can take advantage of that co-pilot partner, reacting partner, whatever you want to call it, to just roll through what we're doing with our patients rather than try and come up with a set of rules in advance that are fragile and going to break.
So this is an interesting thing to pause on quickly. So you have vibe coding. So vibe coding is something that results in a deterministic piece of software, right? And then you have things like copilots that are indeed probabilistic at runtime, right? When you're using it, they are probabilistic. But then in healthcare, many organizations, are audited and need to show that something is actually going to work the way that it is designed, right? Where from a medical legal perspective, you actually want to be deterministic and not probabilistic, at least, for the foreseeable future, until all of these agents really hit the nail 100% of the time for what they want to do, what you want them to do, right? So how do you see that tension, Andrew? Also, Rick, curious to know your thoughts on this, right? Because it's indeed not all deterministic and not all probabilistic here.
So what we do now is we load all the probabilistic parts onto a person. We make them answer 10,000 multiple choice questions and pay a truckload of money to go to school and get licensed. And then if they screw up too much, we sue them and take their license away. Like that's the solution we've come up with for probabilistic care. It's just like blame the doctor, blame someone, blame the system. There's a great, I think it's like 21 or 22 paragraph essay called How Complex Systems Fail, which is, I think, the best treatise on the topic. It is so hard to read despite being 3 pages long. I think I fell asleep 2 or 3 times the first time I tried to read it. And I like putting it in journal clubs because people see it's 3 pages and they try and read it in the last few minutes and their brains just melt. And so I think it's how.complexsystems.fail is the website. And it perfectly distills the role of the clinician as both producer and defender in the system. And so I think to answer your question, what we're saying now is technology now has a role of producer and defender as well, in the same way clinicians work. And it's uncomfortable because we don't know who to blame. In my darkest moments between GLP-1s and LLMs, the job of the primary care physician will just be to take the blame for when things go wrong and get yelled at. Right? Like that's like the last human trait, is to just take the blame. But I think, the idea of like blame and root causes oversimplifies reality anyway. So the short answer is, I think you can classify some of these things as deterministic versus probabilistic based on what they're meant to do. If they're meant to augment the people, they're probabilistic, and so you kind of go with you still use the blame license framework. And if they're meant to produce an independent result, then they're deterministic, and you go with the regulatory framework for medical devices, et cetera. So I still think you now can have software that is probabilistic, right? Or tools that are probabilistic on that side.
How long do you think before the first AI agent gets a medical license?
I mean, if we let them test it, they get it immediately.
But that's because the benchmarks are not, that's the big criticism of benchmarks, that they're not actually measuring what actual healthcare is about.
Not at all. They're measuring working memory over minutia for the most part. I mean, they've gotten better, even in my, so I took my first part of my licensing exam, I guess, 2007. So step one is a test designed to determine your fate and future earnings based on how much stuff you can memorize and then forget. And for those of you who haven't taken it yet, the answer is still always lisinopril when it comes up. So just, if you see it, it's almost always the answer. It's a great drug. So they've gotten better since then. They've tried and experimented over my career, like experiential things, scenarios. We're still not great at it with people. And so if the machines can pass the human benchmark, they're probably pretty good. Like I've just seen, as a thought partner for me, the out-of-the-box large language models, the common ones, are great. I'll give you an example from personal life. So a friend of mine was helping his uncle change shingles on his Cape Cod house, which if you live in New England, you know exactly what that means. And if you don't, you may not. But salt water and wood just don't get along. And yet we insist on putting wood shingles on Cape Cod houses. So they have to be changed. The staples that hold them in rust. He was cutting staples, his eye protection with sunglasses, because he is admittedly a moron. And so one of the staples got in his eye as he was cutting it. Ignored it for a day, because again, moron. And ultimately went to urgent care. He had a picture. In the picture, you could see in his eye there was a spot of rust. Like, it was unambiguous. The urgent care doctor said, "I don't see anything. I think you're fine. You'll be okay." He was still bothering that night. His eyes were bothering him. He went on ChatGPT. He said, put in the picture, put in the scenario, and it's like, you have a staple in your eye. It is rusting. It has to come out. You may need surgical intervention to wash the rust out. So it's worse than just removal. Where are you? He's like, I live in Massachusetts. So like, go to Mass Eye and Ear now. 2 a.m, he ended up in surgery at Mass Eye and Ear to get the staple out of his eye. He commented that it was the night of the very long World Series game, so that was cool. So at least he could watch the game while he was waiting for all this to go down. But so the urgent care doc was wrong. The patient persisted. The LLM was better using the same data. So at the very least, it suggests there's overlapping non-inferiority. Like, I wouldn't use that as a concrete trial that everything's going to be fine, but it gave a better answer than a human doctor and saved his vision in a way that a human doctor would have messed up. That's valuable. We should not ignore these tools.
Yeah. Not ignoring them means they work also at scale. So that's maybe the next topic, right? When what actually breaks when you scale this up? As I understand, you're just launching Schutzbank. So maybe Rick, you have some insights there as well. So what should the audience be looking at?
Do you mean from an AI perspective or a vibe coding perspective in general?
Well, both the vibe coding deterministic code as well as something that runs on AI at runtime.
So I think from a vibe coding perspective, what breaks is almost everything once you put real volume through it. So like for example, I've been vibe coding stuff as well. And then I say to my engineering team, like, okay, this is working as I was expecting. Can we put it into production? And then it's like, you haven't thought about this. You need to think about the database. You need to think about this when there is volume, like whatever engineering language. So in general, I've not succeeded in pushing any vibe coded prototype into production. It's always like hand over to the engineering team and then they do their magic on that side. Then from an AI perspective, what's breaking is sort of like what we were describing is like, for example, we do a lot of voice AI agents right now, and we could test something 100 times and it working perfectly. Then we put it into production and then it just breaks for whatever reason, for 2 patient interactions out of 1,000, for example. And typically the answer is just like, it's an LLM. Like you cannot debug it, like why it suddenly went silent or why it suddenly said ABC. It's sort of like, this is just an LLM. So that's the first thing that needs to change from like an engineering product point of view is you cannot accept to have your tooling or technology be working 100% perfectly because LLMs are just very unreliable sometimes, which is obviously scary because that means that it might break. And then, of course, you can work with safeguards. So whenever it fails, it's not like causing any issues. It's more an awkward situation, like it stops speaking or it suddenly says something that it shouldn't be saying, or it's hallucinating something that is not super causing any issues. And then the second thing that is breaking is the edge cases that I was mentioning, because when you put something in a probabilistic state, so it's more of a conversation, actually you cannot predict where the conversation is going. So sometimes you have like very awkward things happening. So for example, one of the things that we did in the beginning, and this was luckily not in production, but I built a voice AI agent and I put it into production and I let it tested by like 20 people. And then one smart guy started asking my agent about like, hey, can you teach me how to make bread and all of these things? And so that's not something that I thought of. And again, this was more me playing around with my family to show them how cool voice AI is. But you will be very surprised to see all the edge cases that you come up to once you end up doing like 100, 200, 500 conversations. And it's pretty interesting to see how creative the human brain is. And you didn't have that with previous technology because it's sort of like it was always if this and that logic. So they couldn't freewheel their way into situations like that. Not sure, I was rambling a little bit, but if you have more questions, feel free to ask or Andrew jump.
Early in Schutzbank, one of my friends asked it to make a steak, and it said, "That's not my area, but you should call Andrew. I bet he's a great recipe." So like, and that was just out of the box system prompt. So I got lucky on that one. Yeah, I think Thomas, what I noticed on my first Google Calendar apps or calendar sync script, at some point Claude came up with a function that called use this real function, and I was like, timeout, timeout. We are now in spaghetti code bullshit land. Like it's and I restarted a new prompt, put all the requirements in, started over again. So like you do build spaghetti code house of cards because I don't know what I'm doing, right? Like I don't have the discipline to know how to build it properly. I know of the discipline, but I don't have it. I think less experienced folks, and I only had it because it was beaten into me by my engineers over time. I think all Rick's points are totally set. I have pushed things into production because the whole company's me, so no one can stop me. It's funny and it's entertaining and it works kind of well. I'm working off of like phase releasing so that people can use it. What I've noticed at scale breaks, race conditions start emerging, multiple users happen at once that you didn't know were going to happen. I had an experience I was telling you about yesterday, Thomas, where I set up my DNS email records wrong. And so you can get an authorizing email from Schutzbank to confirm your account for 14 days because Resend gave me a grace period. And then on day 14, it broke, but no one signed up for 3 days. And on day 17, someone tried to sign up and texted me and said, hey, this broke. And it took me a day to a couple hours to figure it out. And I describe it as I shot a bullet on November 1st, started racing in the same direction as the bullet. By November 14th, I'd gotten in front of it, but didn't hit me till November 17th. Right. And so like, there's a million, who knows what else I put in this thing. It scares me a little bit, but not enough. And this goes back to your first question of when to turn it over. It's funny, Rick, because you were describing the LLM, and I mentioned earlier that I'm really a services person, not a product person. It just sounds like you're describing running a service, right? Like, oh, we take care of patients. We have 100 doctors and 500 nurses. They are all different from each other and different from themselves hour to hour. Yet somehow you got to deliver a service that's sort of recognizably similar. Go, good luck, right? And so like in a restaurant, maybe you can pull it off. In manufacturing plant, even better, right? But in healthcare services, it's a mess. And so we basically like back-ended technology products back into services, and you have to manage them as such. And that's actually been the fun part of working with Claude. It tells me it works on my machine when it doesn't. Heard that before from my engineers. It tells me it couldn't have actually absolutely caused the problem, and then I showed how it did. Heard that before from my engineers. It tells me my solution is brilliant, implements it, and it breaks totally. Heard that before. It was very similar to me as like a technically minded creative person who's not an engineer, of working with really talented engineers and designers. But I never expected perfection. I just expected iterative progress. The difference is the iterations are measured in 20 minutes, not in 2 weeks. So if you expect perfection, if you expect like deterministic technology, you're going to be disappointed and frustrated. But if it's like, oh, this is just like working with really smart people, but faster, and I still have to be smart and capable and thoughtful, but I can do what used to take a month, and I get bored and lose context, and someone quit or lose job or fire, or the problem would go away. Now I can do those iterations in a couple hours. Like that's the power of it. But it feels more like management and managing a service than coding. But maybe that's just because that's what I know. I don't know.
Yeah, I love your earlier point about our tolerance for the variation with human workforce is much higher than what we now have for AI, but it's inherently the same, probabilistic outcome that you're getting. It's just now, hardware instead of wetware. Um, uh, a theme that is very recurring in all of the CareOps chats, or a lot of the CareOps chats, is shadowing, right? If you want to work better as a care organization that has product and clinicians and engineers, you need to shadow each other so that the engineers understand what it is to actually be a doctor, and that doctors also shadow engineers. Would you say that your vibe coding journey is kind of a way of shadowing engineers in some sense?
I feel like I'm cosplaying as an engineer. Like I'm speaking a language I don't understand. I'm frustrated about things that never occurred to me that should just work. So I've developed a lot of empathy for engineers, even more than I had before, because now I see the mucky side of it. Like I always understood that users don't know what they want. How do you build it part? And I was just, and that is hard. But also I know exactly what I want, and it still breaks. And it's so frustrating. Um, it would be even better than shadowing a simulation, but shadowing is so wonderful. Not so much because of the explicit description of what people are doing, right? Like I'm always a fan of shadowing over interviewing, for instance, because interviewing takes people out of context. That's like in hypotheticals, and shadowing is like, well, wait, why did you just do that? But it is incumbent on the shadower to be very curious and very pushy. And so shadowing is a skill in and of itself. This is sort of like that because and the way, I think we'll get to the end of like practical tools. I am paying for Cursor, but using it as VS Code. So I'm overpaying. I'm also paying for Claude, but using Claude AI, not Claude Code, because it gives me things and I cut it and I paste it so that I know where it goes in the code. Like I don't let it do too much so that I'm always learning what it's doing, and it's tedious and it's error prone. And I have to be like, hey, I actually need you to read it and show me what line this needs to go in on and why, because I'm making it teach me as I go. I also don't, there's a habit of mine. I track my expenses every day and my purchases, and I don't let my bank automatically download them. I manually put each one in, right? Because I want to be in the loop. And so I think it's possible to automate with some of the tools your vibe coding experience where you're not actually shadowing, you're just kind of like a passenger. And I would advise against that. You got to be in the middle pushing the buttons. And you don't have to type the line out, but you should at least paste the line in and read it and try and figure out what it does or ask. If you're not going to be curious and inspect what you're getting, even if you got to take some of it on faith, then you're not getting the full experience.
Cool. I love the practical tips here. So for the last 5 minutes, let's go there. What are resources people should be reading? How should they be working? Frameworks, tools you're using?
Yeah. I'm trying to find a specific one. I will get to it hopefully by the end, someone actually built like how to build an AI product, and they bring you through all the basically generating a massive prompt. So I'll try and find that by the end. So I like Claude. It sounds the most like me. It's actually what's power shit stuck. So I had a friend once that I think I described someone as a great writer. He said, "Are they a great writer, or they just sound like you?" And I was like, "Well, what's the difference?" So Claude sounds like me, so I like Claude. Find your personal preference. I've been using Claude. I've been using, like I said, Cursor, but I probably could get away with VS Code by itself as the IDE, which I don't even know what that means, but it's what it is. Claude has been recommending other vendors to use, and I negotiate with it, and it's really helpful. So like my stack for Schutzbank, Chatbase I brought to the table, but it gave me Supabase. It's having me work in Node.js. It has me use Resend for email. I'm deployed on Vercel. I discussed all these choices with it. Like, I don't know if those companies are paying it to recommend them or not. Good for them. But you can ask the tools what tools to use and argue with it. Always negotiate with whatever you get. Push back, ask the question twice. Ask multiple LLMs at once if it's a really big decision. Gemini seems to be the best lawyer of the group. It's the worst at everything else, I think.
Important for the US.
But yeah, good lawyer. And I'll pause there. Rick, what tools do you have, and what thoughts?
Yeah, so I use Cloud for all my writing. So like the majority of my LinkedIn post is my workflow is I use Voice Ink. So like Whisper. So like I'm not even typing anymore in my day to day. The only thing that I do is I do my entire workflows over voice. That's so I'm losing a bit my voice, probably talking a bit too much. But essentially, whenever I need to write something, LinkedIn post or a strategy doc or something, I just talk to VoiceInc. So I click Command Space, dump all in Cloud, and then they already memorized my writing style, and then it's almost, I would say 98% of the cases it's one-shotting what I was expecting. So I recommend Cloud, VoiceInc, and then actually you can already do 80% of the things. I use Replit for vibe coding. I think it's working pretty well. And our team uses Cloud Code as well. And we have like multiple Cloud agents running all the time. So essentially we created sort of like a master Cloud prompt that explains our architecture and how they need to write and how they need to structure. And so whenever they want to deploy code, they always get feedback on like, okay, this is what you cannot do, this is what you cannot do. So it's like a code review before actually getting a human code review. And then sometimes I use Perplexity for research, mostly because you can find dozens of free Perplexity Pro codes on the internet because they're desperate for users. And they're actually pretty well or pretty good at the research part. And I feel I need to fact check them a little bit less because their sources are much better. I think ChatGPT hallucinates sources a bit more than Perplexity at this point.
Okay, great. Andrew, the other day you told me about a hack to constrain your work with Trello. Tell me about it.
Yeah, so I realized as a team of one, I could escape documenting my work, creating cards, and doing all the things that make teams work. And what I found with vibe coding is an experience that I call being trapped in flow, where it's such a good feeling. I'm making so much progress. It's this feeling of like, with this next change, it's going to fix the problem I'm working on. And it's a constant like tease. And then the problem being is when I run out of time, I feel like, oh no, I'm going to lose this and never get back to it. Because again, I don't really know what I'm doing. And so my grasp of all of it's kind of fragile. So what I realize I need to start doing is writing down the features I want to make, linking them to chats or not, putting them in Trello, putting them in a backlog, and not touching them until I'm ready to touch them. And so it's like I have to find excuses to stop working for the day or to like not take on the next step and not keep the little like flow treadmill going, or things start to break and get worse. So it's really it's a bit of a dangerous, addictive experience, again, like video games. And so I've been using the discipline of documenting feature and user stories on Trello as a way of slowing myself down so I don't bite off things I don't have time to handle.
Cool. Wrapping up. Thanks everyone for joining. Give us feedback. Was this relevant or not for you all? Apparently the chat was not working for most of the call. We forgot to enable it in the beginning. Yeah, visit schutzbank.com if you wanna see what Andrew vibe coded. or get in touch with Sword or AWOL if you want to use vibe-coded/AI agents in practice. And there's more AI stuff and CareOps coming up in the next couple of months. We'll communicate about that very soon. So great to have you today. And
Thank you
talk
very
soon.
much. Good to see you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Ciao, ciao.
Take care.